Hey everybody! In this video, I'm going to be sitting down with Clement, the CEO of AlgoExpert, and doing a Google-style CSS front-end coding interview. Now, on his channel, we also did a JavaScript and DOM manipulation interview, so make sure to check that out. And we actually use the same problem for both. So in that problem, I have to write the JavaScript, and in this problem, I have to write the CSS. Now, at Google, you might see these just combined into one interview, but it's also likely at some companies that they would be separated, especially if you're applying for a role that has a lot of CSS in the job description. And now, also, much more importantly, this is the first video on this channel, so if you are brand new here, and I know you are, make sure to hit that subscribe button if you're interested in seeing more content from me. If you have no idea who I am, my name is Connor. I'm a software engineer. Previously, I worked at Facebook. Now I work at AlgoExpert, where I created the Front-End Expert course. So I'm going to be posting much more frequently on here, probably about once a week, but I'm still trying to figure out the exact schedule or cadence. So once I get that figured out, I will post in a video what exactly I'm going to be doing. But for now, I'm thinking weekly. So yeah, the content's going to be more like this, more content on software engineering, front-end engineering, etc. So if you're interested in that, make sure to subscribe to keep up to date on all of the new videos. And with that said, do enjoy this interview.
All right, Connor, so we are going to be going through a CSS coding interview today. Are you ready?
Yep, ready.
All right, I'm going to start the clock now. We're probably going to go through this in about 30 minutes. Let's begin. So I have given you a link to the Front-End Expert coding workspace. As you can see on the top left corner of your screen, you've got some pre-written HTML code that I have written. It's pretty simple. I'm going to let you go through it at your own pace once you start to code. But basically, it's got some divs with classes and IDs, some headings, and it effectively is the HTML for the questions list on Front-End Expert. And so at the bottom left corner of your screen, you can see the expected output. So this is the output from the HTML that you just saw, but it's of course styled, and you're going to have to write the styles to get this output. As you can see, it is a variation of the questions list on Front-End Expert. So you've got all the questions. Here there are 9 of them. You've got some categories. They're in a sort of column layout. They've got little status indicators that determines whether they've been successfully submitted, and so on and so forth. You are going to have to write the CSS. I've given you some important styles in the code box at the top right corner, so they're commented out. These are things that you're just going to have to use in your code. So for example, the font color for the questions, the thing called question right side is that little green rectangle on the right side of each question band. The status circles, you can kind of see correct, you have to use that linear gradient. Unattempted is when it's just the little empty circle with a little border. And yeah, you need to turn that bottom right corner of your screen into something that looks as close to or as similar to the bottom left corner of your screen as possible. Do you have any questions for me?
No, I think that makes sense. Sounds good.
So before you jump into writing some CSS, I do want to just ask you a few CSS questions, conceptual questions, just to kind of test your understanding of some of these CSS concepts. And I think that they might help you, as you try to solve this problem. So the first thing that I would ask you is just, can you explain to me the box model?
Yeah, box model. So I guess elements on the page are naturally going to be boxes or squares, or I guess rectangles is more correct. So every element's going to be a rectangle, even if it's styled to look like a circle. Everything's going to be this rectangle. And the box model is sort of a model for how that rectangle is going to take up its space. So the box model is made up of 4 components. So the innermost component is going to be the content. So the content's the actual content of the element. So in the case of an H1, it's going to be sort of a box around the actual text. And then we have, I'm going to skip the second step for a second. So we have a border that can go around our content. The border is optional, but you can create a border of different sizes and stuff. And in between the border and the content is going to be padding. So padding is essentially this extra space around the content that is going to separate the content from the border. So it sort of just gives some breathing room to our content so that we don't have borders right up against the actual content. And then we have the margin is going to be the outermost layer of the box model. So we have content on the inside, padding, and then we have the border, and then we have margin on the outside. So margin is outside of the border, and it is going to be the space from one element to another element. So how far away your element is from other stuff on the screen, essentially.
Yep, perfect. So then this leads into my second question, which is related to the flex model versus the grid model or layout. And basically, can you explain to me the differences between flex and grid? Maybe like when would you use one or the other?
Yeah. So Flexbox's sort of main use case is one-dimensional. So we sort of align things in a row or we align things in a column. Whereas grid is going to be two-dimensional, as the name suggests. We have this sort of two-dimensional grid. Well, Flexbox can sort of have things go into new lines with flex wrap. It naturally is going to be a single row or I guess a single column as well. And when Flexbox does go to multiple lines, you don't have too much fine-grained control of when exactly that happens. It's sort of based on the browser window size and just how much space there is for your elements. So eventually they'll wrap if you have flex wrap on. Whereas with grid, when you do have that two-dimensional layout, you can really control, okay, I want this element to always be on the second row on the right, for example. Whereas with Flexbox, you don't have really that control of where exactly elements are going to end up.
Okay, great. Well, listen, I think these two questions are going to be enough for now. Let's just jump straight into the question. And, maybe I'll ask you some more a little bit further down the line.
Sounds good. Okay.
So feel free to begin writing CSS.
Yeah. Think about this for a second. Okay. So I think what we can do is sort of start just from the top to the bottom. So let's start with the top of our HTML. So we have this interview questions H1, and it looks like in the expected output, it's being centered, and it's a little bit closer to the stuff below it. So it's going to be the margin like we talked about a moment ago. So let's create a rule set for the H1. And first of all, we need to center the text. So we can say text align center. And then it looks like it just has no margin. So I'm assuming we have margin 0 here.
And for the exact values of some of these things like margin, don't worry about, what it should be exactly. Just make it look similar. So I think 0 is approximately correct here.
Okay, cool. Sounds good. And now below this, we have this wrapper div. And it looks like, so this wraps all of the categories. And then each category, so I take it the categories is sort of one of these columns, right? And we have the H2, and then we have these question divs. Okay. So...
And Connor, just sorry to cut you off, but if you resize the bottom left box, you'll notice that the less space there is, columns wrap around. Like you see how that JavaScript column wrapped around? So that's something that you want to make sure you mimic. Okay, cool. So sort of, again, based on the questions you asked a second ago, we can sort of assume that we need to use flex there. That'd be a little bit harder to achieve with grid. For one, just because the sort of default layout we have here is one-dimensional. It's just a row. And we don't seem like we're really controlling when this goes to a new line as much as just when we run out of space. So so let's make the wrapper a flex container. And then each of these category columns will be a flex item in that container. So the wrapper is an ID, so we can select the wrapper container, and we can say that this is going to be display flex. Okay, and now we get this sort of all on one line, which is a little bit closer to what we want. We have them sort of vertically stacked. Okay, and now let's look at the individual categories to see what we need to do here. Well, actually, let's also add some spacing before we do that. So it looks like rainbow circles is basically touching testing framework in the output. So I'll just add a gap here of, let's say, like 10 pixels. I don't think that was something specified up here, just to add some spacing. Okay. And now we can see if we can try to make a question.
So the question is a class. And let's see, up here, I think there was some style for this. So we have a font color is going to be this. So we can say color is this color. Okay, so now we have that green color, and it looks like on hover, it turns black after half a second.
Yep.
So we can use a pseudo class for this. So we can say question, hover, we will do color is going to be black.
And what is a pseudo class exactly?
Yeah, so a pseudo class, we use this colon and then the name of the pseudo class. And essentially this is a way to extend a selector to only work based, or to only select the element when it's in a certain state. So in this case, the state is hover, but there are tons of obviously like different states that we can select elements on. So this one is going to select it when my mouse goes over the element. We would see it turns black.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. And then you said black on hover after half a second. So we need to use, I think, the transition property for this to sort of transition the color over that half second. So we'll want to do it on the actual question, because if we do it on hover, then it won't transition away. It's like when you leave your mouse, since the hover class gets removed, the transition wouldn't work. So it needs to be on this one. So we can say transition, and we will transition the color. So this is just the property we transition, and then we need to give it some amount of time. So we can say 0.5 seconds. And I believe now if we hover over one of these, yeah, so we get this sort of slow transition. Cool.
Yep.
And do we want to have, or do we want to change the cursor here when we hover as well, or should we just leave it as this?
You know what? Sure. Let's make that cursor kind of the default, little hand, like you can press it.
The like hand where it's like you mean like the pointer, or do you mean like the grabbing hand thing?
Pointer. I didn't want to say pointer because I didn't want to give the exact property value, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Oh, pointer. Okay. So you mean this guy?
Yep, exactly.
Okay.
Although what you did bring up is a good point. Like the grabbing hand, I believe that on the actual AlgoExpert website, we have the little grabbing hand when you hover over those little green rectangles, because you can reorder questions. But you don't need to worry about that for now.
Okay. Sounds good. Okay, so let's see, what do we have next? So we have the question right side is 25 pixels, and we have this color here. So I think we can do that using just a border on the question. So we can say the border right is going to be this color. And we'll just do 25 pixels, and it is solid of that color. Okay, so now we get these little box guys on the side. And let's see, so we also have a shadow. So the shadow looks like it's this color here. And then we have an X offset of 0 and a Y offset of 1 pixel and a blur radius of 2 pixels. Okay,
and to be clear, the shadows are it's like under the little white band for each question.
Right, yeah, so should these questions, I guess, also have a white background color to them?
Yeah, because I don't know if you can tell on the the expected output, but yeah, it's like a little bit. It's white. It's a little bit lighter than the background, which is like a grayish background.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So I'll add that white background color, and then we can do a box shadow, and let's get this color. And let's see. So we had X offset 0, Y offset 1 pixel, and blur radius 2 pixels. So I think we can specify them in that order. I believe if you do 3 elements with a shadow, it's going to be X, Y, blur. So we can say 0, 1 pixel, and 2 pixels. Okay, so that shadow looks about right. It looks like we also need some padding because we have like no space between the text and the edge of the background. So we can say padding. I guess we can do like 10 pixels. I don't think that was specified either. Oh,
nope.
Oh, we don't want 10 pixels. Sorry?
10 pixels if it looks like the output, which right now it doesn't.
Yeah, clearly it does not. Maybe like 4 pixels. 2 pixels. We might not actually need this padding at all. That space might actually just be coming from the circles. So I'll come back to that.
Okay.
I'm curious. Okay. Yeah, we'll come back to that in a second. Yeah. Okay. So let's do these status circles and I'll come back to that padding because it got really big and I'm not entirely sure why. So the status is going to be the status class. So dot status, and it looks like this is a 20 pixel by 20 pixel circle. So we can say the width is 20 pixels, the height is 20 pixels. And to make a circle, we can do a border radius of 50%. And then we need to give them the correct colors. So it looks like we use linear gradients. So we'll copy. So I'm just going to copy all this down here for a second so
okay.
I can sort of see it while I'm typing this. Oops. We did not get that. Okay. So we need, first of all, the correct class, I believe. Yeah. So we have correct is going to have a background that is a linear gradient, and linear gradient just takes in sort of a starting value and an ending value. So we can pass these in like this, and we get those little circles, which seems good. And then we want to do the same thing for the other options. So partially correct is going to have a background of a linear gradient, and we can copy these values and change this to a comma. Okay. And then we have incorrect and unattempted. So incorrect is going to have a background of a linear gradient. And then we need these values. Okay. And the last one looks like it just has a border, so there's no background at all. I guess it's just transparent.
Yep. And it's, I believe it's unattempted as the class.
Unattempted. And this one has a 1 pixel solid border. So we can say border 1 pixel solid and that color there. Okay. So it looks like we have all of these how we want them. Their circles are appearing above the content, which I guess makes sense because these are divs, so they're block elements. So let's come into our question, and I guess we can make this be display flex, and that should move these on the same lines. And then we want to, I guess, vertically align them. So we can say align items center to vertically align it. Okay. And yeah, so that does create that spacing we had. So I guess the spacing is just from the circles. And okay, so it looks like the circles have some margin in your output versus mine are sort of like right up against the text. So let's come in to the statuses and add some margin. I don't know, maybe 5 pixels seems about like what you have. Okay. And now I'm also noticing that mine isn't spanning to the full like width of the page. I guess if I refresh or if I resize this, yeah, so yours goes all the way over. So let's see. So for the questions, we want to tell them, so these are flex items within this wrapper, and we want to tell the flex items that they can grow as much as possible. So I think we can just do flex grow of 1. And since they all have flex grow of 1, I think this should make it grow the whole space, but clearly that doesn't exactly work. Let's see. Oh, I guess we need the categories to flex grow rather than the questions, right? Because they're questions are not the flex items of the wrapper. The categories are. So do we have a class for this? I don't think we do.
We do. Well, you didn't create it, but it's a class category.
I meant we don't have a selector for it. So we can say that this is going to be flex grow of 1. Okay, cool. So now we have this taking up the full space. We also need I think, vertical margin between the individual questions. So we could either do that just using margin, or we could make the category a flex container and then use gap. So we could do like display flex here and do a flex direction of column and a gap of, I don't know how much space that is between them, but let's say like 5 pixels. And I think that should add like 5 pixels of vertical space between them.
Yep. You could put maybe a little bit more, but it doesn't really matter.
Should we go 10?
Yeah, 10 should be fine.
Okay. And then it looks like our headings, these like, are they H2s? Yeah, so the H2s here are taking up too much space. So let's add a selector for that and remove its margin. So let's try margin 0. Okay, so that looks more like it's taking up the right amount of space. Now let's see.
And right now, are your categories wrapping if you have not enough space for them?
That's what I was about to wonder. So I don't believe they will. I think if we run out of space, they're just going to kind of shrink and then eventually run out of space. So I think we can use flex wrap for that. So let's see. Yeah, the wrapper is the flex container for these. So we can say flex wrap. And then also I think we want some border radius on the questions, just looking at the output. So let's say border radius to round the corners. I don't know what the value is, but do 10 pixels. Just that looks like way too much. 5 pixels. Okay.
Yep.
So now if we resize this again, it should wrap, I believe. Yeah, so we get this wrapping onto the next line. Cool. And see, is there anything else that I missed in this?
So that is about it. I was just about going to ask you the border radius, but you came up with it immediately. One question that I would have for you, you don't have to write anything here, but just how would you change this code if you had to make the little green chips on the right side of each question clickable or draggable? In other words, do you think that this code would allow you to do that right now? What would you do?
That's a good question. So I guess no, it wouldn't right now, just because it's the same element, right? So this is a border, and it's just the border of this question, and you can't necessarily as far as I'm aware, at least, I don't know of a way to add a click event handler or a drag event to a border. So I guess we would need to either edit the HTML to add another element for it that's draggable div or whatever and style that as green, or we could use a pseudo element and use the after selector. So instead of using a border to create this, we could sort of insert a element using after to insert essentially the same thing we would create with that div. And I think you can make those clickable. I'm actually not 100% sure, but I think the cleanest solution would be to just add a div in here in the HTML for it.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm actually not sure off the top of my head about the after selector, if you can make those clickable. But in my mind, I was thinking we would have to edit the HTML. And in fact, I do believe that in the real AlgoExpert codebase or Frontend Expert codebase, it's not a border. It's just an entirely separate div.
Yeah.
But okay, good. I mean, I think this about wraps up the interview. You definitely were able to replicate with a good enough margin of error the look of these questions. And so great job.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, I think mine are a little bigger or something, but
a little bigger, but doesn't really matter. They are close enough.
Cool.
So on that note, just very quick feedback to give you. There isn't really much feedback. I think you clearly demonstrated a great mastery of CSS. You answered the couple of conceptual questions that I gave you well at the beginning. And yeah, you clearly know all the fundamentals, at least that this question tested. Flexbox versus grid, display, block, inline. Because you mentioned that the circles were above the text at one point because the elements were had the default display. You knew how to handle transitions, box shadows, even things like linear gradient, which ironically, I wouldn't necessarily expect you to know how to make the linear gradient. I would have maybe expected you to be like,
Yeah.
what is a linear gradient exactly?
I
But
think
you clearly...
if it wasn't worded as linear gradient in here, it would have taken a second to figure out how to do it. But I had seen the like, what is it, the linear gradient function before, but
yeah. And those are,
Haven't come up
those
with
are not
names of those.
necessarily... Exactly. And those are, overall, I would say, like, obviously I can't speak for every company, but I think most companies would not be looking for you to necessarily know the exact properties. Same for the things like the shadow, the fact that you knew that, you can do color, X offset, blur, or whatever in that order. Obviously, like, it's great. It's like an added bonus, but it's not something that is really, at least something that I would personally value, For me, it was more the fact that ultimately, like, you clearly have a great mastery of CSS fundamentals, and you have this added bonus of you seem to know a lot of the nitty gritty of CSS without needing to look it up, which is like just a bonus. But so, yeah, I mean, all that to say, fantastic job. And that's it for the interview.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you so much. Okay. So that is the end of this interview. If you did make it this far, then make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay up to date with future content. And I'm told to also tell you to smash the like button. So with that said, that is the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.